These are the circumstances under which I came to explore Back Cup while on a visit to Bermuda. This archipelago, which is situated about 750 miles from North Carolina, is composed of several hundred islands or islets. Its center is crossed by the 64th meridian and the 32nd parallel. Since the Englishman Lomer was shipwrecked and cast up there in 1609, the Bermudas have belonged to the United Kingdom, and in consequence the colonial population has increased to 10,000 inhabitants. It was not for its productions of cotton, coffee, indigo, and arrowroot that England annexed the group, seized it, one might say, but because it formed a splendid maritime station in that part of the ocean, and in proximity to the United States of America. Possession was taken of it without any protest on the part of other powers, and Bermuda is now administered by a British governor with the addition of a council and a general assembly. The principal islands of the archipelago are called St. David, Somerset, Hamilton, and St. George. The latter has a free port, and the town of the same name is also the capital of the group. The largest of these isles is not more than 17 miles long and 5 wide. Leaving out the medium-sized ones, there remains but an agglomeration of islets and reefs, scattered over an area of 12 square leagues. Although the climate of Bermuda is very healthy, very salubrious, the isles are nevertheless frightfully beaten by the heavy winter tempests of the Atlantic, and their approach by navigators presents certain difficulties. What the archipelago especially lacks are rivers and rios. However, as abundant rains fall frequently, this drawback is got over by the inhabitants, who treasure up the heaven-sent water for household and agricultural purposes. This has necessitated the construction of vast cisterns, which the downfalls keep filled. These works of engineering skill justly merit the admiration they receive and do honor to the genius of man. It was in connection with the setting up of these cisterns that I made the trip, as well as out of curiosity to inspect the fine works. I obtained from the company of which I was the engineer in New Jersey a vacation of several weeks, and embarked at New York for the Bermudas. While I was staying on Hamilton Island, in the vast port of Southampton, an event occurred of great interest to geologists. One day a whole flotilla of fishers, men, women, and children, entered Southampton Harbor. For 50 years these families had lived on the east coast of Back Cup, where they had erected log cabins and houses of stone. Their position for carrying on their industry was an exceptionally favorable one, for the waters teem with fish all the year round, and in March and April whales abound. Nothing had hitherto occurred to disturb their tranquil existence. They were quite contented with their rough lot, which was rendered less onerous by the facility of communication with Hamilton and St. George. Their solid barks took cargoes of fish there, which they exchanged for the necessities of life. Why had they thus abandoned the islet with the intention, as it pretty soon appeared, of never returning to it? The reason turned out to be that they no longer considered themselves in safety there. A couple of months previously they had been at first surprised, then alarmed, by several distinct detonations that appeared to have taken place in the interior of the mountain. At the same time, smoke and flames issued from the summit, or the bottom of the reversed cup, if you like. Now no one had ever suspected that the islet was of volcanic origin, or that there was a crater at the top, no one having been able to climb its sides. Now, however, there could be no possible doubt that the mountain was an ancient volcano that had suddenly become active again and threatened the village with destruction. During the ensuing 2 months, internal rumblings and explosions continued to be heard, which were accompanied by bursts of flame from the top, especially at night. The island was shaken by the explosions. The shocks could be distinctly felt. All these phenomena were indicative of an imminent eruption, and there was no spot at the base of the mountain that could afford any protection from the rivers of lava that would inevitably pour down its smooth, steep slopes and overwhelm the village in their boiling flood. Besides, the very mountain might be destroyed in the eruption. There was nothing for the population exposed to such a dire catastrophe to do but leave. This they did. Their humble lares and penates, in fact all their belongings, were loaded into the fishing smacks, and the entire colony sought refuge in Southampton Harbor. The news that a volcano, that had presumably been smoldering for centuries at the western extremity of the group, showed signs of breaking out again, caused a sensation throughout the Bermudas. But while some were terrified, the curiosity of others was aroused, mine included. The phenomenon was worth investigation, even if the simple fisherfolk had exaggerated. Back Cup, which, as already stated, lies at the western extremity of the archipelago, is connected therewith by a chain of small islets and reefs, which cannot be approached from the east. Being only 300 feet in altitude, it cannot be seen either from St. George or Hamilton. I joined a party of explorers, and we embarked in a cutter that landed us on the island, and made our way to the abandoned village of the Bermudan fishers. The internal crackings and detonations could be plainly heard, and a sheaf of smoke was swayed by the wind at the summit. Beyond a peradventure, the ancient volcano had been started again by the subterranean fire, and an eruption at any moment was to be apprehended. In vain we attempted to climb to the mouth of the crater. The mountain sheared down at an angle of from 75 to 80 degrees, and its smooth, slippery sides afforded absolutely no foothold. Anything more barren than this rocky freak of nature, it would be difficult to conceive. Only a few tufts of wild herbs were to be seen upon the whole island, and these seemed to have no raison d'etre. Our explorations were therefore necessarily limited, and in view of the active symptoms of danger that manifested themselves, we could but approve the action of the villagers in abandoning the place, for we entertained no doubt that its destruction was imminent. These were the circumstances in which I was led to visit Back Cup, and no one will consequently be surprised at the fact that I recognized it immediately we hove in sight of the queer structure. No, I repeat, the Count d'Artigas would probably not be overpleased if he were aware that Warder Gaydon is perfectly acquainted with this islet, even if the Ebba was to anchor there, which, as there is no port, is, to say the least, extremely improbable. As we draw nearer, I attentively examine Back Cup. Not one of its former inhabitants has been induced to return, and as it is absolutely deserted, I cannot imagine why the schooner should visit the place. Perhaps, however, the Count d'Artigas and his companions have no intention of landing there. Even though the Ebba should find temporary shelter between the rocky sides of a narrow creek, there is nothing to give ground to the supposition that a wealthy yachtsman would have the remotest idea of fixing upon, as his residence, an arid cone, exposed to all the terrible tempests of the western Atlantic. To live here is all very well for rustic fishermen, but not for the Count d'Artigas, Engineer Serko, Captain Spade and his crew. Back Cup is now only half a mile off, and the seaweed thrown up on its rocky base is plainly discernible. The only living things upon it are the seagulls and other birds that circle in clouds around the smoking crater. When she is only 2 cables lengths off, the schooner slackens speed, and then stops at the entrance of a sort of natural canal formed by a couple of reefs that barely rise above the water. I wonder whether the Ebba will venture to try the dangerous feat of passing through it. I do not think so. She will probably lay where she is, though why she should do so I do not know, for a few hours, and then continue her voyage towards the east. However this may be, I see no preparations in progress for dropping anchor. The anchors are suspended in their usual places, the cables have not been cleared, and no motion has been made to lower a single boat. At this moment, Count d'Artigas, Engineer Serko and Captain Spade go forward and perform some maneuver that is inexplicable to me. I walk along the port side of the deck until I am near the foremast, and then I can see a small buoy that the sailors are hoisting in. Almost immediately the water, at the same spot, becomes dark, and I observe a black mass rising to the surface. Is it a big whale rising for air, and is the Ebba in danger of being shattered by a blow from the monster's tail? Now I understand. At last the mystery is solved. I know what was the motor that caused the schooner to go at such an extraordinary speed without sails and without a screw. Her indefatigable motor is emerging from the sea, after having towed her from the coast of America to the archipelago of the Bermudas. There it is, floating alongside, a submersible boat, a submarine tug, worked by a screw set in motion by the current from a battery of accumulators or powerful electric piles. On the upper part of the long cigar-shaped iron tug is a platform in the middle of which is the lid, by which an entrance is effected. In the forepart of the platform projects a periscope, or lookout, formed by portholes or lenses, through which an electric searchlight can throw its gleam for some distance under water in front of and on each side of the tug. Now relieved of its ballast of water, the boat has risen to the surface. Its lid will open and fresh air will penetrate it to every part. In all probability, If it remained submerged during the day, it rose at night and towed the eba on the surface. But if the mechanical power of the tug is produced by electricity, the latter must be furnished by some manufactory where it is stored, and the means of procuring the batteries is not to be found on Back Cup, I suppose. And then, why does the eba have recourse to this submarine towing system? Why is she not provided with her own means of propulsion, like other pleasure boats? These are things, however, upon which I have at present no leisure to ruminate. The lid of the tug opens and several men issue on to the platform. They are the crew of this submarine boat, and Captain Spade has been able to communicate with them and transmit his orders as to the direction to be taken by means of electric signals connected with the tug by a wire that passes along the stem of the schooner. Engineer Serko approaches me and says, pointing to the boat, "Get in." "Get in," I exclaim. "Yes, in the tug, and look sharp about it." As usual, there is nothing for it but to obey. I hasten to comply with the order and clamber over the side. At the same time, Thomas Rock appears on deck accompanied by one of the crew. He appears to be very calm, and very indifferent too, and makes no resistance when he is lifted over and lowered into the tug. When he has been taken in, Count d'Artigas and Engineer Serko follow. Captain Spade and the crew of the eba remain behind, with the exception of 4 men who man the dinghy, which has been lowered. They have hold of a long hawser, with which the schooner is probably to be towed through the reef. Is there then a creek in the middle of the rocks where the vessel is secure from the breakers? Is this the port to which she belongs? They row off with the hawser, and make the end fast to a ring in the reef. Then the crew on board haul on it, and in 5 minutes the schooner is so completely lost to sight among the rocks that even the tip of her mast could not be seen from the sea. Who in Bermuda imagines that a vessel is accustomed to lay up in this secret creek? Who in America would have any idea that the rich yachtsman so well known in all the eastern ports abides in the solitude of Back Cup Mountain? 20 minutes later, the dinghy returns with the 4 men towards the tug, which was evidently waiting for them before proceeding. Where? They climb on board, the little boat is made fast astern, a movement is felt, the screw revolves rapidly, and the tug skims along the surface to Back Cup, skirting the reefs to the south. 3 cables' lengths further on, another tortuous canal is seen that leads to the island. Into this the tug enters. When it gets close inshore, an order is given to 2 men who jump out and haul the dinghy up on a narrow sandy beach out of the reach of wave or weed, and where it will be easily get-atable when wanted. This done, the sailors return to the tug, and Engineer Serko signs to me to go below. A short iron ladder leads into a central cabin where various bales and packages are stored, and for which no doubt there was not room in the hold of the schooner. I am pushed into a side cabin, the door is shut upon me, and here I am once more a prisoner in profound darkness. I recognize the cabin the moment I enter it. It is the place in which I spent so many long hours after our abduction from Healthful House, and in which I was confined until well out at sea off Pamlico Sound. It is evident that Thomas Rock has been placed in a similar compartment. A loud noise is heard, the banging of the lid as it closes, and the tug begins to sink as the water is admitted to the tanks. This movement is succeeded by another, a movement that impels the boat through the water. 3 minutes later it stops, and I feel that we are rising to the surface again. Another noise made by the lid being raised. The door of my cabin opens, and I rush out and clamber on to the platform. I look around and find that the tug has penetrated to the interior of Back Cup Mountain. This is the mysterious retreat where Count d'Artigas lives with his companions, out of the world, so to speak. Chapter 9. Inside Back Cup. The next morning, I am able to make a first inspection of the vast cavern of Back Cup. No one seeks to prevent me. What a night I have passed, what strange visions I have seen, with what impatience I waited for morning. I was conducted to a grotto about 100 paces from the edge of the lake where the tug stopped. The grotto, 12 feet by 10, was lighted by an incandescent lamp, and fitted with an entrance door that was closed upon me. I am not surprised that electricity is employed in lighting the interior of the cavern, as it is also used in the submarine boat. But where is it generated? Where does it come from? Is there a manufactory installed somewhere or other in this vast crypt, with machinery, dynamos, and accumulators? My cell is neatly furnished with a table on which provisions are spread, a bunk with bedding, a basket chair, a wash-hand stand with toilet set, and a closet containing linen and various suits of clothes. In a drawer of the table I find paper, ink, and pens. My dinner consists of fresh fish, preserved meat, bread of excellent quality, ale and whiskey, but I am so excited that I scarcely touch it. Yet I feel that I ought to fortify myself and recover my calmness of mind. I must, and will solve the mystery surrounding the handful of men who burrow in the bowels of this island. So it is under the carapace of Back Cup that Count d'Artigas has established himself. This cavity, the existence of which is not even suspected, is his home when he is not sailing in the Ebba along the coasts of the New World or the Old. This is the unknown retreat he has discovered, to which access is obtained by a submarine passage 12 or 15 feet below the surface of the ocean. Why has he severed himself from the world? What has been his past? If, as I suspect, this name of d'Artigas and this title of Count are assumed, what motive has he for hiding his identity? Has he been banished? Is he an outcast of society that he should have selected this place above all others? Am I not in the power of an evildoer anxious to ensure impunity for his crimes, and to defy the law by seeking refuge in this undiscoverable burrow? I have the right of supposing anything in the case of this suspicious foreigner, and I exercise it. Then the question to which I have never been able to suggest a satisfactory answer once more surges into my mind. Why was Thomas Rock abducted from Healthful House in the manner already fully described? Does the Count d'Artigas hope to force from him the secret of his fulgurator, with a view to utilizing it for the defense of Back Cup, in case his retreat should by chance be discovered? Hardly. It would be easy enough to starve the gang out of Back Cup, by preventing the tug from supplying them with provisions. On the other hand, the schooner could never break through the investing lines, and if she did, her description would be known in every port. In this event, of what possible use would Thomas Rock's invention be to the Count d'Artigas? Decidedly, I cannot understand it. About 7 o'clock in the morning, I jump out of bed. If I am a prisoner in the cavern, I am at least not imprisoned in my grotto cell. The door yields when I turn the handle and push against it, and I walk out. 30 yards in front of me is a rocky plain, forming a sort of quay that extends to right and left. Several sailors of the Ebba are engaged in landing bales and stores from the interior of the tug, which lays alongside a little stone jetty. A dim light to which my eyes soon grow accustomed envelops the cavern and comes from a hole in the center of the roof, through which the blue sky can be seen. It is from that hole that the smoke which can be seen for such a distance issues, I say to myself, and this discovery suggests a whole series of reflections. Back Cup, then, is not a volcano, as was supposed, as I supposed myself. The flames that were seen a few years ago, and the columns of smoke that still rise, were and are produced artificially. The detonations and rumblings that so alarmed the Bermudan fishers were not caused by the internal workings of nature. These various phenomena were fictitious. They manifested themselves at the mere will of the owner of the island, who wanted to scare away the inhabitants who resided on the coast. He succeeded, this Count d'Artigas, and remains the sole and undisputed monarch of the mountain. By exploding gunpowder and burning seaweed swept up in inexhaustible quantities by the ocean, he has been able to simulate a volcano upon the point of eruption and effectually scare would-be settlers away. The light becomes stronger as the sun rises higher, the daylight streams through the fictitious crater, and I shall soon be able to estimate the cavern's dimensions. This is how I calculate. Exteriorly, the island of Back Cup, which is as nearly as possible circular, measures 250 yards in circumference, and presents an interior superficies of about 6 acres. The sides of the mountain at its base vary in thickness from 30 to 100 yards. It therefore follows that this excavation practically occupies the whole of that part of Back Cup Island which appears above water. As to the length of the submarine tunnel by which communication is obtained with the outside, and through which the tug passed, I estimate that it is 50 yards in length. The size of the cavern can be judged from these approximate figures, but vast as it is, I remember that there are caverns of larger dimensions both in the Old and New Worlds. For instance, in Carniole, Northumberland, Derbyshire, Piedmont, The Balearics, Hungary, and California are larger grottos than Back Cup, and those at Hans-sur-Lesse in Belgium and the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky are also more extensive. The latter contain no fewer than 226 domes, 7 rivers, 8 cataracts, 32 wells of unknown depth, and an immense lake which extends over 6 or 7 leagues, the limit of which has never been reached by explorers. I know these Kentucky grottos, having visited them, as many thousands of tourists have done. The principal one will serve as a comparison to Back Cup. The roof of the former, like that of the latter, is supported by pillars of various lengths, which give it the appearance of a Gothic cathedral, with naves and aisles, though it lacks the architectural regularity of a religious edifice. The only difference is that whereas the roof of the Kentucky grotto is over 400 feet high, that of Back Cup is not above 220 at that part of it, where the round hole through which issue the smoke and flames is situated. Another peculiarity, and a very important one, that requires to be pointed out, is that whereas the majority of the grottos referred to are easily accessible, and were therefore bound to be discovered some time or other, the same remark does not apply to Back Cup. Although it is marked on the map as an island forming part of the Bermuda Group, how could anyone imagine that it is hollow, that its rocky sides are only the walls of an enormous cavern? In order to make such a discovery, it would be necessary to get inside, and to get inside a submarine apparatus similar to that of the Count d'Artigas would be necessary. In my opinion, this strange yachtsman's discovery of the tunnel, by which he has been able to found this disquieting colony of Back Cup, must have been due to pure chance. Now I turn my attention to the lake and observe that it is a very small one, measuring not more than 400 yards in circumference. It is, properly speaking, a lagoon, the rocky sides of which are perpendicular. It is large enough for the tug to work about in it, and holds enough water too, for it must be 125 feet deep. It goes without saying that this crypt, given its position and structure, belongs to the category of those which are due to the encroachments of the sea. It is at once of Neptunian and Plutonian origin, like the grottos of Crozon and Morgate in the Bay of Douarnenez in France, of Bonifacio on the Corsican coast, Thorgatan in Norway, the height of which is estimated at over 300 feet, the catavaults of Greece, the grottos of Gibraltar in Spain, and Tirana in Cochin, China, whose carapace indicates that they are all the product of this dual geological labor. The islet of Back Cup is in great part formed of calcareous rocks, which slope upwards gently from the lagoon towards the sides, and are separated from each other by narrow beaches of fine sand. Thick layers of seaweed that have been swept through the tunnel by the tide and thrown up around the lake have been piled into heaps, some of which are dry and some still wet, but all of which exhale the strong odor of the briny ocean. This, however, is not the only combustible employed by the inhabitants of Back Cup, for I see an enormous store of coal that must have been brought by the schooner and the tug. But it is the incineration of masses of dried seaweed that causes the smoke vomited forth by the crater of the mountain. Continuing my walk, I perceive on the northern side of the lagoon the habitations of this colony of troglodytes. Do they not merit the appellation? This part of the cavern, which is known as the beehive, fully justifies its name, for it is honeycombed by cells excavated in the limestone rock, and in which these human bees, or perhaps they should rather be called wasps, reside. The lay of the cavern to the east is very different. Here hundreds of pillars of all shapes rise to the dome, and form a veritable forest of stone trees through the sinuous avenues of which one can thread one's way to the extreme limit of the place. By counting the cells of the beehive, I calculate that Count d'Artigas' companions number from 80 to 100. As my eye wanders over the place, I notice that the Count is standing in front of one of the cells, which is isolated from the others, and talking to Engineer Serco and Captain Spade. After a while, they stroll down to the jetty, alongside which the tug is lying. A dozen men have been emptying the merchandise out of the tug and transporting the goods in boats to the other side, where great cellars have been excavated in the rocks and form the storehouses of the band. The orifice of the tunnel is not visible in the waters of the lagoon, and I remember that when I was brought here, I felt the tug sink several feet before it entered. In this respect, therefore, Back Cup does not resemble either the grottos of Staffa or Morgate, entrance to which is always open, even at high tide. There may be another passage communicating with the coast, either natural or artificial, and this I shall have to make my business to find out. The island well merits its name of back cup. It is indeed a gigantic cup turned upside down, not only to outward appearance, but inwardly too, though people are ignorant of the fact. I have already remarked that the beehive is situated to the north of the lagoon, that is to say to the left on entering by the tunnel. On the opposite side are the storerooms filled with provisions of all kinds, bales of merchandise, barrels of wine, beer, and spirits, and various packets bearing different marks and labels that show that they came from all parts of the world. One would think that the cargoes of a score of ships had been landed here. A little farther on is a large wooden shed, the nature of which is easily distinguishable. From a pole above it, a network of thick copper wires extends which conducts the current to the powerful electric lights suspended from the roof or dome, and to the incandescent lamps in each of the cells of the hive. A large number of lamps are also installed among the stone pillars and light up the avenues to their extremities. Shall I be permitted to roam about wherever I please? I ask myself. I hope so. I cannot for the life of me see why the Count d'Artigas should prohibit me from doing so, for I cannot get farther than the surrounding walls of his mysterious domain. I question whether there is any other issue than the tunnel, and how on earth could I get through that? Besides, admitting that I am able to get through it, I cannot get off the island. My disappearance would be soon noticed, and the tug would take out a dozen men who would explore every nook and cranny. I should inevitably be recaptured, brought back to the beehive, and deprived of my liberty for good. I must therefore give up all idea of making my escape, unless I can see that it has some chance of being successful, and if ever an opportunity does present itself, I shall not be slow to take advantage of it. On strolling round by the rows of cells, I am able to observe a few of these companions of the Count d'Artigas, who are content to pass their monotonous existence in the depths of Back Cup. As I said before, calculating from the number of cells in the beehive, there must be between 80 and 100 of them. They pay no attention whatever to me as I pass, and on examining them closely, it seems to me that they must have been recruited from every country. I do not distinguish any community of origin among them, not even a similarity by which they might be classed as North Americans, Europeans, or Asiatics. The color of their skin shades from white to yellow and black, the black peculiar to Australia rather than to Africa. To sum up, they appear for the most part to pertain to the Malay races. I may add that the Count d'Artigas certainly belongs to that particular race which peoples the Dutch Isles in the West Pacific, while Engineer Serko must be Levantin and Captain Spade of Italian origin. But if the inhabitants of Back Cup are not bound to each other by ties of race, they certainly are by instinct and inclination. What forbidding, savage-looking faces they have, to be sure. They are men of violent character, who have probably never placed any restraint upon their passions, nor hesitated at anything, and it occurs to me that in all likelihood they have sought refuge in this cavern, where they fancy they can continue to defy the law with impunity after a long series of crimes, robbery, murder, arson, and excesses of all descriptions committed together. In this case Back Cup is nothing but a lair of pirates. The Count d'Artigas is the leader of the band, and Serko and Spade are his lieutenants. I cannot get this idea out of my head, and the more I consider the more convinced I am that I am right, especially as everything I see during my stroll about the cavern seems to confirm my opinion. However this may be, and whatever may be the circumstances that have brought them together in this place, Count d'Artigas' companions appear to accept his all-powerful domination without question. On the other hand, if he keeps them under his iron heel by enforcing the severest discipline, certain advantages, some compensation, must accrue from the servitude to which they bow. What can this compensation be? Having turned that part of the bank under which the tunnel passes, I find myself on the opposite side of the lagoon, where are situated the storerooms containing the merchandise brought by the Ebba on each trip, and which contain a great quantity of bales. Beyond is the manufactory of electric energy. I gaze in at the windows as I pass and notice that it contains machines of the latest invention and highest attained perfection, which take up little space. Not one steam engine, with its more or less complicated mechanism and need of fuel, is to be seen in the place. As I had surmised, piles of extraordinary power supply the current to the lamps in the cavern, as well as to the dynamos of the tug. No doubt the current is also utilized for domestic purposes, such as warming the beehive and cooking food. I can see that in a neighboring cavity it is applied to the alembics used to produce fresh water. At any rate, the colonists of Back Cup are not reduced to catching the rain water that falls so abundantly upon the exterior of the mountain. A few paces from the electric powerhouse is a large cistern that, save in the matter of proportions, is the counterpart of those I visited in Bermuda. In the latter place, the cisterns have to supply the needs of over 10,000 people, this one of 100. What? I am not sure yet what to call them. That their chief had serious reasons for choosing the bowels of this island for his abiding place is obvious. But what were those reasons? I can understand monks shutting themselves behind their monastery walls with the intention of separating themselves from the world, but these subjects of the Count d'Artigas have nothing of the monk about them, and would not be mistaken for such by the most simple-minded of mortals. I continue my way through the pillars to the extremity of the cavern. No one has sought to stop me, no one has spoken to me, not a soul apparently has taken the very slightest notice of me. This portion of Back Cup is extremely curious, and comparable to the most marvelous of the grottos of Kentucky or the Balearics. I need hardly say that nowhere is the labor of man apparent. All this is the handiwork of nature, and it is not without wonder, mingled with awe, that I reflect upon the telluric forces capable of engendering such prodigious substructions. The daylight from the crater in the center only strikes this part of the cavern obliquely, so that it is very imperfectly lighted, but at night, when illuminated by the electric lamps, its aspect must be positively fantastic. I have examined the walls everywhere with minute attention, but have been unable to discover any means of communicating with the outside. Quite a colony of birds, gulls, sea swallows, and other feathery denizens of the Bermudan beaches have made their home in the cavern. They have apparently never been hunted, for they are in no way disturbed by the presence of man. But besides seabirds, which are free to come and go as they please by the orifice in the dome, there is a whole farmyard of domestic poultry, and cows and pigs. The food supply is therefore no less assured than it is varied, when the fish of all kinds that abound in the lagoon and around the island are taken into consideration. Moreover, a mere glance at the colonists of Back Cup amply suffices to show that they are not accustomed to fare scantily. They are all vigorous, robust seafaring men, weather-beaten and seasoned in the burning beat of tropical latitudes, whose rich blood is surcharged with oxygen by the breezes of the ocean. There is not a youth nor an old man among them. They are all in their prime, their ages ranging from 30 to 50. But why do they submit to such an existence? Do they never leave their rocky retreat? Perhaps I shall find out ere I am much older. Chapter 10. Cur Carriage. The cell in which I reside is about 100 paces from the habitation of the Count d'Artigas, which is one of the end ones of this row of the beehive. If I am not to share it with Thomas Rock, I presume the latter's cell is not far off, for in order that Warder Gaydon may continue to care for the expatian of Healthful House, their respective apartments will have to be contiguous. However, I suppose I shall soon be enlightened on this point. Captain Spade and Engineer Serco reside separately in proximity to 500 Artigas, mansion. Mansion, yes, why not dignify it with the title, since this habitation has been arranged with a certain art. Skillful hands have carved an ornamental facade in the rock. A large door affords access to it. Colored glass windows in wooden frames let into the limestone walls admit the light. The interior comprises several chambers, a dining room and a drawing room lighted by a stained glass window, the whole being perfectly ventilated. The furniture is of various styles and shapes and of French, English, and American make. The kitchen, larder, etc., are in adjoining cells in rear of the beehive. In the afternoon, just as I issue from my cell with the firm intention of obtaining an audience of the Count d'Artigas, I catch sight of him coming along the shore of the lagoon towards the hive. Either he does not see me, or wishes to avoid me, for he quickens his steps and I am unable to catch him. Well, he will have to receive me anyhow, I mutter to myself. I hurry up to the door through which he has just disappeared, and which has closed behind him. It is guarded by a gigantic, dark-skinned Malay, who orders me away in no amiable tone of voice. I decline to comply with his injunction, and repeat to him twice the following request in my very best English. Tell the Count d'Artigas that I desire to be received immediately. I might just as well have addressed myself to the surrounding rock. This savage, no doubt, does not understand a word of English, for he scowls at me and orders me away again with a menacing cry. I have a good mind to attempt to force the door and shout so that the Count d'Artigas cannot fail to hear me, but in all probability I shall only succeed in rousing the wrath of the Malay, who appears to be endowed with Herculean strength. I therefore judge discretion to be the better part of valor, and put off the explanation that is owing to me, and which, sooner or later, I will have to a more propitious occasion. I meander off in front of the beehive towards the east, and my thoughts revert to Thomas Rock. I am surprised that I have not seen him yet. Can he be in the throes of a fresh paroxysm? This hypothesis is hardly admissible, for if the Count d'Artigas is to be believed, he would in this event have summoned me to attend to the inventor. A little farther on I encounter Engineer Serko. With his inviting manner and usual good humor, this ironical individual smiles when he perceives me, and does not seek to avoid me. If he knew I was a colleague, an engineer, providing he himself really is one, perhaps he might receive me with more cordiality than I have yet encountered, but I am not going to be such a fool as to tell him who and what I am. He stops with laughing eyes and mocking mouth, and accompanies a good day, how do you do, with a gracious gesture of salutation. I respond coldly to his politeness, a fact which he affects not to notice. May Saint Jonathan protect you, Mr. Gaydon. He continues in his clear, ringing voice. You are not, I presume, disposed to regret the fortunate circumstance by which you were permitted to visit this surpassingly marvelous cavern, and it really is one of the finest, although the least known on this spheroid. This word of a scientific language, used in conversation with a simple hospital attendant, surprises me, I admit, and I merely reply. I should have no reason to complain, Mr. Serko, if, after having had the pleasure of visiting this cavern, I were at liberty to quit it. What, already thinking of leaving us, Mr. Gaydon, of returning to your dismal pavilion at Healthful House? Why, you have scarcely had time to explore our magnificent domain, or to admire the incomparable beauty with which nature has endowed it. What I have seen suffices, I answer, and should you perchance be talking seriously, I will assure you seriously that I do not want to see any more of it. Come now, Mr. Gaydon, permit me to point out that you have not yet had the opportunity of appreciating the advantages of an existence passed in such unrivaled surroundings. It is a quiet life, exempt from care, with an assured future material conditions such as are not to be met with anywhere, an even climate and no more to fear from the tempests which desolate the coasts in this part of the Atlantic than from the cold of winter or the heat of summer. This temperate and salubrious atmosphere is scarcely affected by changes of season. Here we have no need to apprehend the wrath of either Pluto or Neptune. Sir, I reply, it is impossible that this climate can suit you, that you can appreciate living in this grotto of... I was on the point of pronouncing the name of Back Cup. Fortunately, I restrained myself in time. What would happen if they suspected that I am aware of the name of their island, and, consequently, of its position at the extremity of the Bermuda group? However, I continue, if this climate does not suit me, I have, I presume, the right to make a change. The right, of course. I understand from your remark that I shall be furnished with the means of returning to America when I want to go. I have no reason for opposing your desires, Mr. Gaydon, Engineer Serko replies, and I regard your presumption as a very natural one. Observe, however, that we live here in a noble and superb independence, that we acknowledge the authority of no foreign power, that we are subject to no outside authority, that we are the colonists of no state, either of the old or new world. This is worth consideration by whomsoever has a sense of pride and independence. Besides, what memories are evoked in a cultivated mind by these grottos, which seem to have been chiseled by the hands of the gods, and in which they were wont to render their oracles by the mouth of Trophonius. Decidedly, Engineer Serko is fond of citing mythology. Trophonius after Pluto and Neptune. Does he imagine that Warder Gaydon ever heard of Trophonius? It is clear this mocker continues to mock, and I have to exercise the greatest patience in order not to reply in the same tone. A moment ago, I continue shortly, I wanted to enter yon habitation, which, if I mistake not, is that of the Count d'Artigas, but I was prevented. By whom, Mr. Gaydon? By a man in the Count's employ. He probably had received strict orders about it. Possibly, yet whether he likes it or not, Count d'Artigas will have to see me and listen to me. Maybe it would be difficult, and even impossible to get him to do so, says Engineer Serko with a smile. Why so? Because there is no such person as Count d'Artigas here. You are jesting, I presume. I have just seen him. It was not the Count d'Artigas whom you saw, Mr. Gaydon. Who was it then, may I ask? The pirate Carriage. This name was thrown at me in a hard tone of voice, and Engineer Serko walked off before I had presence of mind enough to detain him. The pirate Carriage. Yes, this name is a revelation to me. I know it well, and what memories it evokes. It by itself explains what has hitherto been inexplicable to me. I now know into whose hands I have fallen. With what I already knew, with what I have learned since my arrival in Back Cup from Engineer Serko, this is what I am able to tell about the past and present of Carriage. 8 or 9 years ago, the West Pacific was infested by pirates who acted with the greatest audacity. A band of criminals of various origins, composed of escaped convicts, military and naval deserters, etc., operated with incredible audacity under the orders of a redoubtable chief. The nucleus of the band had been formed by men pertaining to the scum of Europe who had been attracted to New South Wales, in Australia, by the discovery of gold there. Among these gold diggers were Captain Spade and Engineer Serko, two outcasts, whom a certain community of ideas and character soon bound together in close friendship. These intelligent, well-educated, resolute men would most assuredly have succeeded in any career, but being without conscience or scruples, and determined to get rich at no matter what cost, deriving from gambling and speculation what they might have earned by patient and steady work, they engaged in all sorts of impossible adventures. One day they were rich, the next day poor, like most of the questionable individuals who had hurried to the gold fields in search of fortune. Among the diggers in New South Wales was a man of incomparable audacity, one of those men who stick at nothing, not even at crime, and whose influence upon bad and violent natures is irresistible. That man's name was Carriage. The origin or nationality or antecedents of this pirate were never established by the investigations ordered in regard to him. He eluded all pursuit, and his name, or at least the name he gave himself, was known all over the world and inspired horror and terror everywhere as being that of a legendary personage, a bogey, invisible and unseizable. I have now reason to believe that Carriage is a Malay. However, it is of little consequence, after all. What is certain is that he was with reason regarded as a formidable and dangerous villain who had many crimes, committed in distant seas, to answer for. After spending a few years on the Australian goldfields, where he made the acquaintance of Engineer Serko and Captain Spade, Carriage managed to seize a ship in the port of Melbourne, in the province of Victoria. He was joined by about 30 rascals whose number was speedily tripled. In that part of the Pacific Ocean where piracy is still carried on with great facility, and I may say profit, though number of ships pillaged, crews massacred, and raids committed in certain western islands which the colonists were unable to defend, cannot be estimated. Although the whereabouts of Carriage's vessel, commanded by Captain Spade, was several times made known to the authorities, all attempts to capture it proved futile. The marauder would disappear among the innumerable islands of which he knew every cove and creek, and it was impossible to come across him. He maintained a perfect reign of terror. England, France, Germany, Russia, and America vainly dispatched warships in pursuit of the phantom vessel which disappeared, no one knew whither, after robberies and murders that could not be prevented or punished had been committed by her crew. One day this series of crimes came to an end, and no more was heard of Carriage. Had he abandoned the Pacific for other seas? Would this pirate break out in a fresh place? It was argued that notwithstanding what they must have spent in orgies and debauchery, the pirate and his companions must still have an enormous amount of wealth hidden in some place known only to themselves, and that they were enjoying their ill-gotten gains. Where had the band hidden themselves since they had ceased their depredations? This was a question which everybody asked, and none was able to answer. All attempts to run them to earth were vain. Terror and uneasiness having ceased with the danger, Carriage's exploits soon began to be forgotten, even in the West Pacific. This is what had happened, and what will never be known unless I succeed in escaping from Back Cup. These wretches were, as a matter of fact, possessed of great wealth when they abandoned the southern seas. Having destroyed their ship, they dispersed in different directions after having arranged to meet on the American continent. Engineer Serko, who was well versed in his profession, and was a clever mechanic to boot, and who had made a special study of submarine craft, proposed to Carriage that they should construct one of these boats in order to continue their criminal exploits with greater secrecy and effectiveness. Carriage at once saw the practical nature of the proposition, and as they had no lack of money, the idea was soon carried out. While the so-called Count d'Artigas ordered the construction of the schooner Ebba at the shipyards of Göteborg in Sweden, he gave to the Cramps of Philadelphia, in America, the plans of a submarine boat whose construction excited no suspicion. Besides, as will be seen, it soon disappeared and was never heard of again. The boat was constructed from a model and under the personal supervision of engineer Serko, and fitted with all the known appliances of nautical science. The screw was worked with electric piles of recent invention, which imparted enormous propulsive power to the motor. It goes without saying that no one imagined that Count d'Artigas was none other than Carriage, the former pirate of the Pacific, and that engineer Serko was the most formidable and resolute of his accomplices. The former was regarded as a foreigner of noble birth and great fortune, who for several months had been frequenting the ports of the United States, the Ebba having been launched long before the tug was ready.